You never expect betrayal to come dressed as love, yet there you were, sitting at the family table, when the words fell like a knife. The $25,000 inheritance your grandmother left for you would now go to your sister. In that instant, the lights above seemed too bright, the voices too loud, and your heart too heavy. It wasn't just money being taken, it was your future, your dignity, and the silent sacrifices no one ever noticed. What would you do if the people you trusted most decided your dreams were expendable? Stay with this story, and if these drama stories touch your heart, a quiet like or subscribe is more than enough to walk this path together. You sat there in silence, the weight of the words pressing against your chest like an invisible stone. Inheritance, future, dreams, all shifted away from you with one careless decision, wrapped in the gentle tone of your parents' voices, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. Your fork trembled in your hand, the candlelight flickering against the polished silver, but no one noticed. They were too busy celebrating Clara's spark, close quote, too eager to pour another glass of wine in her honor. Inside, you felt something unravel. Not simply the loss of money, but the shattering of trust you'd believed might still be saved. You realized then, painfully, that this was not a sudden betrayal, it was only the latest chapter in a story that had been unfolding your whole life. Do you know that feeling? When you suddenly see your past in a new light, and every moment of neglect adds up to one undeniable truth. The memories came rushing back. You thought of your 16th birthday. Clara was handed a sleek designer handbag, wrapped in layers of golden tissue paper. She squealed with delight, showing it off to the camera as your parents clapped. Your gift had been a small book, its title printed in cheerful letters. The Efficient Teen's Guide to Time Management. You had smiled politely, but inside you wondered why you were given tools while she was given dreams. Back then, you told yourself it was fine, you were the responsible one. But in truth, it was the first sign that responsibility was simply a mask they placed on you to justify giving her more. Another scene replayed in your mind. Your high school graduation. You stood on stage as valedictorian, medal heavy against your chest, delivering a speech that spoke of hope and resilience. When the ceremony ended, you searched the crowd for your family, only to find they had slipped away to attend Clara's minor award for a talent show. The only family photo taken that day showed Clara smiling with her flimsy certificate, while your medal remained unseen in its velvet box. And then, Thanksgiving. You had spent hours in the kitchen, cooking and cleaning, ensuring every dish was perfect. When guests praised the pumpkin pie, your mother proudly declared, "Clara has such a delicate touch in the kitchen." You had stood by the sink, hands raw from hot water, staring at the tiled floor, wondering how your labor could vanish into someone else's spotlight so easily. These memories pressed against you now, each one a reminder that tonight's theft of $25,000 was not a shock, it was an inevitability. The bus ride home felt endless. Rain slid down the windows in crooked streaks, and each drop mirrored the tears you swallowed. The city lights blurred into colors you no longer belonged to. You weren't part of the glowing restaurants, the laughter spilling from crowded bars. You were outside, looking in, always the invisible shadow. But on that ride, something shifted. Beneath the grief, beneath the despair, there was a flicker of resolve. Perhaps it was born from exhaustion, perhaps from years of carrying burdens alone. Whatever its origin, it told you this. If you could not depend on their support, you would depend only on yourself. If they had taken the inheritance of money, you would build an inheritance of strength. What about you? If your family turned its back on you, would you let the betrayal define you, or would you fight to write a different story? The days that followed were merciless. At 5 in the morning, you tied your apron and stepped into the noise of the cafe, surrounded by hissing steam and the bitter scent of coffee grounds. By noon, you were seated in a lecture hall, filling notebooks with theories that felt like stepping stones out of darkness. And in the evenings, you became a tutor, guiding students through equations, your voice calm, even as fatigue clawed at your mind. Your meals were simple: noodles, bread, a single egg on rare days when you allowed yourself a treat. Every dollar stretched thin, every choice weighed like a battle plan. Yet in that struggle, you discovered something profound: resilience. With no safety net, you became your own foundation. It was during one of those weary weeks that recognition finally found you. A professor summoned you to his office. He had read your analysis, studied your insight, and saw something rare. For the first time, someone called your mind extraordinary. He offered you a position on a research project, a stipend to ease your burdens, and a chance to step into a future that no one could take from you. You walked out of that office trembling, not from fear, but from the sudden weight of being seen. Truly seen. And in that moment, you understood. The inheritance your grandmother left you was not only money. It was her faith in your strength, her belief that you would rise even when others pushed you down. From then on, your journey took on new meaning. Each morning was still heavy, each night still lonely, but every step carried purpose. You weren't just surviving anymore, you were building. Slowly, silently, you laid the foundation of a life no betrayal could destroy. And perhaps that's the irony of it all. The $25,000 they stole became the spark that ignited something far more powerful. Had they given it to you, you might have been comfortable, secure, but not transformed. In taking it, they gave you the fire to forge your own strength. Can you see how life works sometimes? The very wound meant to break you becomes the scar that defines your strength. Does anyone else feel that strange paradox that pain, in the end, can create resilience? So you carried on. With each dollar saved, each exam conquered, each late-night tutoring session completed, you were no longer simply surviving the neglect, you were defying it. And though they believed they had silenced you, the truth was that you were only growing louder in the one language that mattered: success. If this part of the story stirs something in you, if you've ever felt invisible but refused to give up, let this be a quiet reminder. Resilience is its own inheritance. And if you'd like to walk further into these drama stories with me, a gentle like or subscribe will be enough to keep us connected on this journey. From the moment your professor looked at you and said, "Your mind is rare," something inside shifted. It was as if years of silence had cracked open, and a new voice was finally allowed to speak. For so long you had been told you were practical, capable, good at scraping by. Words meant to sound like compliments, but used only to justify giving more to your sister. Yet here was someone who saw beyond the mask, who recognized not just your endurance but your brilliance. You walked out of his office clutching a paper, but what you truly carried was permission, a permission to believe in yourself in ways your family had never allowed. The days that followed became heavier, yes, but also more meaningful. The cafe at dawn still demanded your presence, the lectures still consumed your afternoons, the tutoring sessions still drained your evenings. But now, beneath the exhaustion, there was purpose. Each shift, each page of notes, each solved equation became a stone laid carefully in the foundation of a future you were building with your own hands. Do you know that kind of exhaustion, the kind that burns, but beneath the burn is a strange sense of pride? When your body aches, but your heart whispers, "Keep going, this will matter one day." Your classmates began to notice. While some scrolled through their phones during lectures, your pen never stopped moving. While others celebrated weekends with laughter and music, you spent your nights surrounded by books, fueled by coffee and determination. Slowly, your professors began to expect your hand to rise first, your questions to cut deeper than the rest. For the first time, you weren't invisible. Meanwhile, Clara's life painted a different picture. Through the glow of social media, you sometimes saw her posts. Champagne glasses clinking in dimly lit clubs, sunlit photo shoots in borrowed clothes, captions filled with the language of success without the substance. Her followers admired, but you recognized the emptiness. The business your inheritance had funded was little more than a stage. Still, you did not linger there. Your energy could no longer be wasted on comparisons. You had chosen a different path, a quieter, lonely one, but one lined with something real. One late afternoon, after submitting your midterm paper, you found yourself called again to the professor's office. You expected critique, perhaps even disappointment. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, eyes shining with something almost like pride. "This is extraordinary," he said, tapping your paper. "You don't just solve problems, you see through them." Those words echoed inside you like a hymn. Extraordinary. Not practical. Not dependable. Extraordinary. And with that recognition came an opportunity you never imagined. A role as a research assistant. The stipend wasn't just money. It was survival. It covered tuition, eased the weight of your double shifts, and gave you breathing space for the first time in years. But more than survival, it was dignity. You no longer had to beg your family for scraps. You had earned your place. From there, the transformation accelerated. You immersed yourself in research, in theories that stretch your mind, in data that danced with hidden patterns only you seemed to see. Nights still ended with Raymond, mornings still began with fatigue, but your heart pulsed with a different rhythm. You were no longer defined by what had been taken from you, but by what you were building for yourself. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, opportunities began to find you. A published paper here, a conference invitation there. Doors that once seemed sealed now cracked open under the weight of your persistence. Have you ever felt that moment when the world, after years of ignoring you, finally starts to nod in recognition? When all the nights you thought were wasted suddenly bloom into proof that you were right to keep going. Years passed. You defended your thesis with a voice steady and unshaken, a quiet storm of knowledge. When the applause came, it wasn't forced or polite, it was earned. That moment, standing before peers and mentors, was more than academic triumph. It was vindication. And then, the call came. A position at a firm where success was measured not by appearances but by results. You stepped into an office of glass walls and steel, a place where data hummed with power and logic was currency. It was a universe far from the cramped apartment and endless bus rides, but you carried both worlds within you. At first, they tested you with the least promising projects, giving you the tasks no one else wanted. But you knew how to turn scraps into strength. You worked late, finding patterns others dismissed, building solutions no one else saw. And slowly, recognition grew again, not from family this time, but from leaders who valued skill over show. Meanwhile, Clara's staged empire began to crumble. Her posts grew repetitive, her smiles tighter, her borrowed outfits more obvious. Where once she had been the star, close quote, now she was fading into the background of her own performance. You, on the other hand, stood taller with each passing month. Your title changed, your income grew, your voice carried weight in rooms you had once only dreamed of entering. Isn't it remarkable how the story can turn? How the one written off as invisible becomes the one others depend on. And how those once celebrated can quietly fade when the foundation was never real. You carried no bitterness. Success does not always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it comes quietly, like dawn slipping through blinds, unnoticed until the room is already bathed in light. That was how your life felt in those years, gradual, steady, undeniable. Promotions followed one another, not because of luck, but because every late night, every careful analysis, every small victory had built a reputation no one could dismiss. Your office view changed from brick walls to skyline. The meals on your table shifted from instant noodles to warm dishes you chose without guilt. Yet inside, you remained grounded by the memory of every night when survival seemed fragile. Meanwhile, Clara's image began to fracture. The glossy photos could not hide the cracks for long. The so-called business funded by your inheritance struggled against reality. Supplies withdrew, customers drifted away, and debts grew like shadows. Each attempt she made to revive her empire only deepened the hole she had dug. Behind the laughter of social media was silence, behind the sparkle of her dresses was anxiety. And then came the phone call. Your mother's voice, once so firm in her decisions, carried a tremor you had never heard before. She spoke of your father's health, of bills piling up, of Clara's collapse. She used words like family and unity, close quote, words that once had excluded you, but now suddenly reached for your compassion. You listened, the quiet hum of the city outside your window pressing into your thoughts. How many times had you longed to hear those words only to be denied? And now, when the world was falling apart, they called on you. Isn't it strange how silence can last for years, but the moment desperation arrives, suddenly every door that was closed is forced open? Have you ever felt that sudden shift, when those who ignored you return with pleading eyes? You agree to meet, though not out of obligation. Perhaps it was curiosity, perhaps closure, or perhaps the quiet strength of knowing you were no longer the powerless one at the table. The restaurant was no longer golden chandeliers and polished wine glasses. This time it was a modest diner, its flickering neon sign reflecting against rain-soaked streets. You arrived first, your coat damp from the drizzle, your hands steady as you wrapped them around a warm mug of tea. When they entered, you saw the change immediately. Clara's once perfect hair now looked hurriedly styled, her clothes still stylish but worn, her eyes tired. Your father's posture was bent, his steps slower, his health decline visible in the pallor of his skin. Your mother, still carrying her air of control, could not quite mask the fear etched into the corners of her face. They sat down across from you, the silence stretching heavy until your mother finally spoke. Her voice carried no authority this time, only plea. She spoke of debts, of hospitals, of mistakes. Clara stared at the table, unable to meet your gaze. For a moment, you let the silence linger. You remembered that earlier dinner, the bright lights, the toast to Clara's future, the dismissal of your own dreams. The memory hovered between you like a ghost. Yet now, the power had shifted. They needed you. Do you believe in the weight of irony? That the very hands which once pushed you aside would one day reach toward you for salvation? As they spoke, you listened not with bitterness but with clarity. You were no longer the child waiting for recognition, nor the sibling begging for fairness. You were a woman who had built a life from the ashes of neglect, and that gave you the power to choose. Clara finally raised her eyes, and in them you saw not arrogance but desperation. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "I never thought it would come to this. I never thought we'd need you." Those words carried more weight than any apology. They were not enough to erase years of hurt, but they revealed a truth long denied. She had lived in the light your sacrifices made possible, and now that light was gone. You could have turned away. You could have let them carry the burden alone. But instead, you considered something deeper. Justice was not cruelty, and forgiveness did not mean forgetting. What you sought was not revenge but accountability. So you told them calmly that help would come but only with conditions. Clear, firm, undeniable. No more illusions, no more favoritism. The family house, once a symbol of pride, would be sold to cover debts. Clara, who had lived on appearances, would now work and contribute a portion of her income to a scholarship fund. Your parents, who had chosen silence over fairness, would attend financial counseling and family therapy. The table grew silent as your words settled. For once, there was no dismissal, no laughter, no quick excuse. Only the acknowledgement that the balance of power had shifted, and the choices they once made carelessly now carried weight. Have you ever imagined what it feels like to stand in the very place where you once felt powerless and to realize that the story has turned in your favor? As you rose from the table, the rain outside had lightened. The neon sign still flickered, but somehow it seemed softer, less harsh. You walked into the night knowing that while the past could never be erased, the future was finally yours to shape. Behind you, your family remained in silence, their faces marked not by triumph, but by the realization of what they had lost, not just money, but the ease of a daughter who had once accepted invisibility. And within you, there was peace. Not because everything had been made right, but because you no longer carried the weight of their choices. You had your own life, your own path, your own legacy to protect. In the days that followed your meeting at that modest diner, the weight of silence lingered. The contract you drafted was simple but firm, outlining the conditions that would redefine everything. The sale of the family home, Clara's responsibility to contribute from her own earnings, and your parents' agreement to face truths they had long avoided. At first, there was resistance, hesitation in your mother's voice, pride battling with fear in your father's eyes. But desperation has a way of softening even the hardest edges. The house, once the centerpiece of so many gatherings where you felt invisible, was placed on the market. For years it had stood as a symbol of their pride, its walls echoing with Clara's laughter, its rooms filled with memories where you were often a shadow. Now, it became something different. A reminder that even the strongest illusions eventually crumble. Clara struggled the most. For the first time, she entered an office not as the celebrated star of family favoritism, but as an employee expected to perform. The work was not glamorous. Spreadsheets, deadlines, managers who cared little for charm, all of it pressed against her like a weight she had never carried. Yet within that struggle was a small spark of humility. She began to understand what you had endured for years, what it meant to build rather than receive. Have you ever watched someone finally confront the truth they had long denied? That moment when pride is stripped away, leaving only the raw shape of who they really are. Your parents, too, faced their own reckoning. Counseling sessions forced them to reflect on choices made, patterns repeated, and the wounds left behind. At first, your mother defended herself, insisting she had always done what was best. But as the sessions continued, layers of denial began to peel away. She heard herself in the stories you recounted, the birthdays forgotten, the graduations ignored, the inheritance diverted. Your father, quieter but no less complicit, finally admitted that silence had been his way of avoiding conflict, a silence that cost you your rightful place in the family. These realizations did not erase the past, but they began to carve a different future. For the first time, you saw small gestures that once seemed impossible. Your mother asking about your work with genuine interest, your father writing down lessons from his counseling, Clara offering to help without expectation of applause. And yet, you understood something vital. Healing is not about restoring what was, but about creating what can be. You no longer longed for the old family table where you were excluded. You were building your own, with people who saw you fully. Outside of your family's slow transformation, your own life blossomed. At work, you rose steadily, not through noise, but through the quiet strength of consistency. Projects once dismissed as unimportant became shining examples of innovation under your lead. Colleagues began to seek your guidance, not because of obligation, but because they trusted your insight. Your title shifted again, your responsibilities grew, and with them came a sense of belonging you had once believed impossible. And then there was love, the kind not born of obligation or comparison, but of recognition. He saw you not as the sibling overshadowed, not as the daughter dismissed, but as the woman who had built herself from fragments. With him, you discovered a gentleness that contrasted the harshness of your past, a partnership that did not demand silence, but celebrated your voice. Together, you began to dream of a future not defined by scarcity or betrayal, but by trust and choice. One evening, as you prepared dinner in your own home, warm light spilling across the table, laughter rising freely, you paused. For the first time in years, you felt no weight pressing against your chest. The ghosts of old memories still lingered, but they no longer haunted you. They had become teachers, reminders of where you had been, not chains to hold you back. Isn't it remarkable how time transforms wounds into wisdom? How the pain that once consumed you becomes the very soil where growth takes root. Clara visited you one afternoon, her hands nervous, her words hesitant. She admitted she had once believed herself untouchable, shielded by favoritism and comfort. She confessed that losing it all had shown her the truth of her own fragility. Then, with eyes that carried both shame and sincerity, she said two words you had never expected. Thank you. It was not a grand apology, nor a dramatic gesture. But it was real. And for the first time, you saw in her not the rival who had stolen from you, but a woman learning slowly, painfully to stand on her own. Your parents, too, changed in quieter ways. They no longer dismissed your voice. They asked before deciding, listened instead of assuming. They grew softer, humbled by consequences they could no longer ignore. The change was imperfect, uneven, but it was there. And you carried forward with peace. You no longer needed their approval, for your life had already bloomed beyond their reach. You had found mentors who respected you, friends who cherished you, a partner who loved you without conditions. Most of all, you had found yourself, the self they had overlooked, the self they had underestimated, the self that had risen anyway. Have you ever reached that point where the past no longer defines you, but instead becomes the foundation of your strength? That quiet moment when you realize you are free. As the years moved forward, the inheritance that once defined so much of your pain became only a footnote in a much larger story. The money had been stolen, yes, but the legacy it left behind was not what your grandmother intended. It was greater. It was resilience, dignity, and the proof that even when everything is taken, you can still create a life of abundance. And so, while your family learned slowly to carry their share of responsibility, you continued to grow, not as the forgotten daughter or overshadowed sister, but as the author of your own story. Looking back now, you understand something profound. The inheritance they stole was never just about money. It was about recognition, about the belief that your future mattered. And while they denied you that